In this video, we're going to start our conversation on component state. Now, component state is one of the more confusing React core concepts, so we're going to take things nice and slow. In this one, we're going to explore state in an abstract way via a couple of slides. In the next several videos, we're going to start integrating state into our workflow. Now, what exactly does component state allow us to do? Well, component state allows our components to manage some data. So just think about an object with various key value pairs. And when that data changes, the component will automatically re-render to reflect those changes. So in the JSX Indecision app, we did not have that in place, which means that when we changed the array, when I added something onto app.options, I had to manually call re-render. And the same thing was true when I cleared the options array. With component state, all we have to do is manipulate the data, and the component is going to take care of re-rendering itself. What I'd like to do for the rest of this video is just move through two quick slides that outline how component state fits into our components. We're going to go through the general process. We'll go through one concrete example. Then in the next video, we'll actually put it to use. Please do not skip the rest of this one. It is just as important as any programming video in the course. Let's dive right in. To explore how component state is going to fit into our application, let's go ahead and recreate an app we already built in the last section, that little counter example. If you remember, we tracked a single piece of data. It was a variable count whose value started off at 0. And then we showed that to the screen, and we had a +1, -1, and reset button, which allowed you to actually interact with that data. You could change the count based off of your button clicks. For our purposes, we're going to have the exact same feature set. It's going to look exactly the same in the browser, but we're going to see how we would do that using a React component with component state. So step one, when it comes to setting up state, is to come up with a default set of values. Remember our counter app, we started the count off at 0. For the Indecision app, we're going to start our options array off as an empty array. So we need that default state value. Now, when we did this outside of the context of a React component, we had variables. In the case of a React component, we're going to translate that into an object. So step one is to set up the default state object. In our case, it is going to be an object. There's a single thing we want to track. It is count, and it is going to start off at 0. We could have as many properties as we want, or we could leave state off altogether, which is how all of our components currently work. Actually setting up this object, where that happens, we're going to focus on that in the next video. For now, we're just trying to get a high-level overview of how all of this is going to work. So from here, our component is going to render itself for the very first time using those default values. So what's going to happen, we're going to have render get called, and the end result is our app showing up to the screen where we take count, the value being 0, and we dump it right here. If I had a default count of 44, 44 would show up instead, and that brings us to step 2. The component is rendered with default state values. Now I tossed a little asterisk on there because we never call render manually. So steps with an asterisk are implicit. They happen behind the scenes. Things like setting up a default state object, that's something that we're going to actually do. At this point, the app would sit here for all of eternity unless the user actually interacted with it. So we have the 3 buttons. Let's say the user clicks the +1 button. Let's say they want to change the count from 0 to 1. So I click that button and we have some code that runs. We might have a method on our class, handle add 1, and that is in charge of taking the count and just increasing it by 1. Now the actual API for doing that is something that we're going to explore in the next video. For now, let's just say we increase count state by 1. So in our case, we take this from 0 to being 1. What does that look like? Well, we run that code, the state changes, and now we have a counter component whose state is an object, a single property count on that object. The value has been updated from 0 to 1. That is step 3. So step 3 is the state changes based off of some event. Maybe it's user interaction like a button click. Maybe we're waiting for a network request to fetch some data. Whatever it is, the state eventually changes. That brings us to step 4. Notice there is going to be an asterisk next to step 4. The application re-renders itself. So it brings the UI up to date with the component state. In this case, we're out of date. The count getting shown is 0. The count we want to show is 1. So we're going to re-render. That brings things up to date. That is step 4. The component re-rendered using the new state values. Once again, we don't do anything manually to get that done. We just change the state. Behind the scenes, the React component API, it's going to see the state changed, and it's going to make sure the UI gets updated. Now, what's the last step? Well, the last step is to just start at 3 again. So from here, maybe they click +1 again, bringing the count up to 2. Maybe they click -1 or reset. They can continue interacting with the application as often as they want. Now, this is exactly how state is going to fit into our apps. We're going to have some data. Not only do we want to show that data, but we want to allow the data to change. And when the data changes, we want to re-render the UI. So component state is essential for interactive applications, and that is what we're focused on building. So in the next video, we're going to take this abstract flow and we're going to put it into practice by actually building out the counter application using component state. Now, there is a lot we do not know about component state. Let's take a moment to talk about what we do know. Let's recap what we learned. We learned that our state, it's just an object. It is a set of key value pairs. We define our initial data, and that allows us to get that rendered to the screen. So if the count starts off at 0, it is going to show up at 0. We also know that this state object can be changed by us, so we can change it based off of some event, whether it is a button click, a form submission, or something else, like the finishing of an HTTP request that got some JSON data from an API. Now, when we do change the state, the application is automatically going to re-render itself. So React is going to work to get the UI up to date with the new state values. As we saw, when we changed the count to 1, the app automatically re-rendered, bringing the count up to 1 over here. Now, what's the next step? Well, we just wait for the state to change again. If the state never changes, the app never re-renders the component. When the state does change, it'll make sure to get the UI updated as fast as possible. Now, this is all abstract. We haven't written any code. So let's go into the next video where we're actually going to build out what we just explored here. I'm real excited to get to that. I'll see you then.